If you had said to me, talk to me about the social gospel, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City.
The idea that Catholicism or Christianity more broadly could encompass the social gospel and Catholic social teaching, I was ignorant of all of that.
If at times Father Jim Martin seems to be able to speak effectively to people of all walks of life, one reason may be that he's walked many of those walks. His brand new memoir sums it up in a lengthy title, Work in Progress: Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest. A funny, wise, and inspiring spiritual memoir. I'm excited to have Jim Martin join us on this edition of The State of Belief. Make sure you keep listening because Father Jim Martin is going to talk about his conversation with Pope Leo. We need voices like Father Jim Martin to be heard now more than ever. So please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do those things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners too. Our library of past conversations includes over 150 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Rabbi Sharon Brous, Simranjit Singh, Bishop William Barber, and many others. You can help us grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before we get to our interview, there's a couple things I want to give you a heads up on. The first is on Tuesday, February 24th, I'm going to be taking part in something that we are calling the People's State of the Union. This is being organized by Move On, and it's a group of senators and representatives who are choosing not to be in the room with President Trump, recognizing that he tends to use these moments, frankly, to lie to the American people and to mislead and misrepresent what is happening in our country. And so there are now dozens of representatives and senators who are boycotting the State of the Union with Donald Trump and instead having something called the People's State of the Union. They have invited me as a religious leader to talk about religion in that moment. And so I encourage you to find this program. Midas, which is a great news network, is going to be live streaming it with Move On. You can find out information. Just go online, Google it. It will come up. There's been a lot of talk about it. I encourage you to tune in if you really want to hear people talking about America and what is possible right now if we come together as a community, as a whole nation, rather than listening to the president, who generally uses these opportunities to divide us and to stoke fear and negativity. I'm going to be coming in there fully positive, so I hope you'll join us. Then I've got your week all planned out because the next night from 7 to 8:30 Eastern Time, Interfaith Alliance is hosting really the first No Kings training, which is really exciting. It's going to be an interfaith training for people who want to show up for No Kings on March 28th. And we're inviting everyone, no matter what faith tradition you are from. And you know that includes humanists, secular humanists, atheists, anyone coming. We want you there. We're going to talk about how you can interact with the local organizing of No Kings. You yourself can organize a No Kings rally if there's not one in your community. And really talk about, the resources that we're making available for everyone to show up well for No Kings March 28th. You can find out information about that on our website at interfaithalliance.org. So 2 events. First, the People's State of the Union on Tuesday night of February 24th, and then the next night, the No Kings training for interfaith communities, people of all different diverse and beliefs to come together. Please sign up for that. You can find the sign up on interfaithalliance.org. And now to my guest. Reverend James Martin is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large of America Magazine, consultor to the Vatican Secretariat for Communications, and the best-selling author of books including Jesus, A Pilgrimage, and The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. His book, Building a Bridge, How the Catholic Church and the LGBT Community Can Enter into Relationship of Respect, Compassion, and Sensitivity, had a profound impact on many readers on either side of that divide. Father Martin has a new book out, Work in Progress, Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest, a funny, wise, and inspiring spiritual memoir. Oh my God, I'm so excited to talk to Father Martin about this book and so much else that's happening in our world today. Brother Jim, welcome back to the State of Belief.
Thanks, my friend. It's always good to talk to you. I love talking with you. And thanks for having me on your podcast and your show.
Well, first of all, congratulations on this book. I mean, I have to say, like, the moment I saw the title, I was like, oh, this is going to be really good and really funny. And I just want to start with something that you say right in the beginning of the book, which I really loved, which is you said everybody's life is a spiritual journey, whether they know it or not. And I think naming that, I think that's a really, like, foundational idea. You know, I feel that as a pastor as well. Like, you don't have to be religious and you don't have to talk about it in religious terms, but you're alive and you are on a journey. And like actually taking the time to think about that as like with not goalposts, but posts along the way. I think it's really beautiful to name that for your readers who are like reading someone they admire and think of as like, oh, he's the spiritual guy and I'm just the reader. But rather instead inviting them into perhaps ultimately a reflection on their own life.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And one of the points of the book, which is, a lot of the book is retelling of some funny summer job stories, those crazy jobs that you listed in the subtitle, is that God is at work even in a busboy, a podcaster like you, a pastor, a mother, an attorney, even a Jesuit priest. And I think it's only in looking back on our lives that we can see really God's hand in all of this. And it was writing this book about these crazy summer jobs and my work at GE and then entering the Jesuits that I could really see a lot of grace, really a lot of grace and a lot of learning going on. So you're right. I think the key is inviting people to know that they're on a spiritual journey, as you know.
I love that, of course, like we're looking for the punchline. When is he going to feel called? And like, that's when the real stuff starts, but that's actually not, that's just part of it. And the other thing, again, like this, we're talking about the book now. I love talking to you, Brother Jim. So there's lots of things I want to talk about, including like the state of our country. But right now I just am launching into this book and really like talking about why you like really went deep into all of these different moments and that you said something like, I don't regret any of it. And I think living a life, I feel that way. I had a period of drug abuse and drinking and people are like, oh, I'm sorry. And then you got beyond it. And I'm like, I'm not sorry. I learned so much. I was interacting with so many, in a particular way in a particular time. And I learned about grace, as you said. And so nothing is lost if you decide to look at your life that way.
That's a beautiful way of saying it. Nothing is lost. And also, I forgive myself for peccadillos and kind of extravagances and debauched nights. I talk about one or two in the book. I was 17 years old, right? I mean, I didn't kill anybody, didn't rob any banks, actually worked at a bank. I wasn't mean. But I think, to not include those things, to not include the times that I was, drinking and getting high and also, not being charitable and being selfish and being self-centered would have been dishonest.
No, totally.
I find, and I'm sure you do as well, that the kinds of spiritual memoirs that I like the best are the ones where the writer, whether it's Thomas Merton or Henry Nouwen or Kathleen Norris or Augustine, is honest.
Right.
About their background. And it's also not like I say in the book, it's also not like, oh, I rue all that and I regret all that and then I became, a Jesuit priest. No, it led me to where I am. And that's part of these stories and these crazy summer jobs and other work that I did is part of who I am. It formed me, as we say in the Jesuits.
Right. Well, you said you didn't kill anybody, but there's an interesting moment when you killed the Pope.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. So I'll
You
tell
have to tell that story because
It's
I
a-
was reading that. And one, like, it's just a funny idea that you would kill the Pope. But tell the story and then we can talk about it.
Yeah,
a little
spoiler alert, I did not kill the Pope or any popes. I was
But the headline of this entire podcast is how I killed the Pope.
please do not do that. So that's all I need. So I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania in 1978 in September. I'm a freshman. And John Paul I had just been elected, Albino Luciani. I go out with friends of mine who aren't Catholic, right? And so I started to tell all these Jesus jokes, which I am a little embarrassed about that, and they are pretty awful. And we came back to our freshman dorm, and someone said, "Martin, the Pope is dead." And I said, "No, he died a month ago." And he said, "No, the new one." And I said, "What?" And we turned on the radio, and my friend Andy, who I'm still in touch with, said, "You were saying all those Jesus jokes and now he's dead. You killed him." And I actually felt pretty bad. And I woke up the next morning. We were all drunk. I woke up the next morning, and everybody was asking me, "Yeah, I heard you killed the Pope." And so that continued regularly for the rest of my life. When I entered the Jesuits, the first thing Andy said was, "Do they know that you killed the Pope?"
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so no one forgot
no.
this. Yeah.
No. And then when I was ordained,
Oh my God.
when I took my final vows. And funny enough, when I first met Pope Francis, I actually met a real Pope. Andy texted me, and of course, what did he say? Did you tell him that you killed the other guy?
Yeah.
So our friends, one of the reasons I tell the story is because it's a little crazy and funny. I did not, in fact, kill the Pope. And it also, it sort of tells the reader that my friends do not let me take myself too seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. All of this goes into the name of the book, which is Work in Progress, and then Confessions of a bunch of things that ends in priest. But what I like about that title is that it's not a finite idea. You're not like, I've arrived. I became a priest and now I'm perfect. And I think that that's like really also an important idea, is that work in progress really means work in progress, that we hopefully are never done. And I just think that I want to acknowledge that that's part of the sense of this great book, Work in Progress by Jim Martin, is that it's an invitation to imagine our lives as continuing, that we're not done. No one is done until you're really dead. And so like the idea is even at later stages of life, we can still be works in progress.
Totally. Thank you for noticing that. The book actually has the title, which I'm really big on titles. The title has 3 layers. First, it is me, the author, as a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
Second, it is the reader, who is also a work in progress. We're all works in progress. And third, it's kind of a strict telling of what's going on in the book. It is a progression of work. I mean, I'm going from one job to another. So these are work in progress. But yeah, thank you. And I really hope that what people take away, one of the interesting things, Paul, as you know, from doing book talks and whatnot, is you always get something different than you would have expected, from a book. And one of the things that people have been sharing with me, which I think is really beautiful, is, and I didn't expect this, is it's calling up all these old memories that people have had on their own of, for example, summer jobs and their parents and growing up. And they share with me these things. "Oh my gosh, I was a waiter once and this thing happened. And, my parents did this with me and encouraged me to work." And it's been really beautiful. And that's sort of the point of the book, was to get people to think about their own lives. But I guess I've been surprised how many people share with me their summer jobs and what those summer jobs meant to them. And I'm kind of curious, which ones were meaningful to you in your own life?
I basically was, summer jobs included, things like being a chore boy. I would do anything for hire. I would I would mow a lawn like you did. I would weed. I would, or I did, I was a lifeguard for a little bit, and these kinds of things. It wasn't none of it, but even kind of taking that. The other thing that I think is interesting about the book is it takes us along a history of America. there's moments like you start at the bicentennial, which I remember very well as well,
Yeah.
and what that meant and how like, it's both like exciting and incredibly mundane at the same time. And you're like, what are we really doing here? And all the way through, like it's also a history of America. And I remember when Brad, my husband, wrote a book about Flannery O'Connor. My dad, who was not a big Flannery O'Connor fan, but he said, I really liked reading about the time
Mm.
that was covered during her life because it was such a monumental time. And I think there's also that idea of like, how do we remember the time we've lived through? So I think that's also really important because right now we're living in a monumental time. And we have to remember, the history continues.
Yeah, I tried. Thanks for noticing that. I tried to do a little bit of a cultural history too. So there are historical
Yeah.
moments, the bicentennial. I talk about the moon landing. I talk about Richard Nixon resigning. These are all big things in the 70s. The oil crisis, all this
Right.
kind of stuff.
Right.
Ronald Reagan, Reaganomics, the yuppies, all that. I also wanted it to be, as much as it could be, kind of a cultural history of what family life was like then, at least for white middle class families in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. What school was like for me, and because it was kind of it's a little bit of a vanished time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't this sort of halcyon idyll, but one point in the book I talk about all the things that kids could do that they don't do now, and one of them
Mm.
was walking to school at age 4 to kindergarten. And I say in the book that I had this memory, and I asked my mom. I said, "Could that be true?" And she said, "Oh, of course." She said, "I took you to school." You'll love this. I
Yeah.
took you to school the first few times at 4, and then I figured you knew the way. And and I know you have kids as well. I asked my sister, I said, what would happen today if some parents sent their 4-year-old out to walk to school for 2 miles? And Carolyn said, my sister, she said, you'd probably be arrested.
You would be arrested, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I thought that for sure. I mean, a lot of the things, and I live in the city, so I mean, one of the very different things is like just my kids' inability to open a door on their own at
Mm,
this point, even their own door.
mm.
Yeah. I mean, bringing up cultural history and history of America makes me think of you went to college at Wharton, at University of Pennsylvania. We have another person, very well known, maybe a little better known than you. I hate to say that, but it's possible, in a different way, which is our president.
Mhm.
And when we talk about our history as two kind of very young-looking white guys of a certain age, has made an entire movement out of this kind of nostalgia and make America great again. And I do, that's like, I want to talk a little bit about how you understand this moment in America as someone who has gone through this progression and especially as someone who, felt called to the priesthood and what that means to you right now in this moment, having kind of come up through America and arriving now. So I'm sorry to like kind of take a turn, but it feels important to recognize that we are in another moment in history.
Well, I really
Um,
like the way you framed that question, and I see two things going on. One, as you were saying, there is this sort of reach for this nostalgic past that I don't know ever really existed. And if it did exist, say in the 1950s and 1960s when I was alive, it didn't exist for everyone. I
right.
mean, if you were a person of color, if you were LGBTQ, if you were poor, I mean, you can look back on Ozzie and Harriet and the Brady Bunch and all that, and maybe for middle class white people like myself, it was a halcyon time, but not for everyone. I think that's the first thing. But the other thing, Paul, as you were talking, I was thinking just recently, there's been an erasure of history as well.
Right.
Two of the things that I find the most shocking, I mean, truly, I would say that this administration has shocked me in many ways. And, I don't like to get too political, but I can say this. The removal of the plaques around Independence Hall, my hometown in Philadelphia, detailing George Washington's, owning of enslaved people, which is history. It's history. And I thought that was a great step forward. And I know in Philadelphia, as a Philadelphian, that people were very attentive to that and really took a lot of care with that, because it's a shrine, it's a national shrine, and it was very sensitively done. The removal of those plaques, and then even more recently, the removal of the flag from Stonewall,
Right.
constitutes not only a sort of deification of a nostalgia that didn't really exist, but an erasure of history that did exist. And so, I was just thinking last night that, in a sense, it's also anti Christian. Why do I say that? Because Jesus says the truth sets us free. And if we are going against the truth, then we are, acting against that impulse from Jesus. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the
Mm.
life. I really think we have to connect those things and to put forth, in a sense, a false version of history is to put forth lies, is to go against what Jesus asks us to do, which is live in truth.
Up next, much more with Father Jim Martin. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And don't forget, you can also tell Alexa, Gemini, or Siri to play the podcast The State of Belief on any enabled device. Make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. My guest is Father Jim Martin. His brand new memoir is titled Work in Progress, Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest, a funny, wise, and inspiring spiritual memoir. If you look at the way that books are taken off shelves, that have Black characters, that have LGBTQ characters, but also that have Jewish characters or Muslim characters or Sikh. The effort to control the narrative. And really, I think it's rooted in this idea we're a white Christian nation. Anything that makes it that uncomfortable. And by the way, maybe they consider Catholics a part of this, but not always.
Well,
if we think about the past, Catholics were not, sorry to put you on the spot here, but it's really, it's a Protestant ideal, and a lot of Catholic nations had their quotas restricted of immigration, and this is another part of our history that we're seeing right now, just the either intentional amnesia. And that's part of the reason I'm connecting this to your memoir, because it's really important to tell this story and tell all the stories.
Well, and there's a dehumanization of people going on, as you know. People are called animals and vermin. And, we see this in Nazi Germany with the Jews. We see it in Rwanda, between the Hutu and the Tutsis. There is we saw it during World War II with the Japanese. And so there is this move towards dehumanizing people so that then you can mistreat them. And currently, I think the people that are being the most dehumanized would be migrants and refugees, and particularly transgender people, right? This kind of attack on them. And it makes it easier for people to ignore them, to reject them, and, even to do violence against them. Part of my book is also that both of my parents are children of immigrants, right? My mom's parents came right over from Sicily. And I think the other thing, Paul, that just shocks me, really shocks me is, unless you are a Native American, right, you are the child of immigrants. And you could even say, a distinguished family. I know you come from a very distinguished family. Even if your forebears came over in the Mayflower, you're an immigrant. And
Yeah,
so
I
that's
mean,
what's
let's add people who came against their will.
sure, right,
I know you.
exactly.
I know you mean that as well. But yeah, I mean, 100%. And by the way, when my ancestors came over, there was no Ellis Island. They just came over.
Hmm.
So this idea we can't have free borders. Well, actually, we did
Hmm.
at one point, and then they. But yeah, I mean, 100%. I do think you're naming something that we just have to keep on naming. Is that if you call people, if you dehumanize them, it allows things to be done to them. And that is the history of terrible atrocities in this country as well as in Nazi Germany and other places. And, it's just an important fact that the week before ICE went to Minneapolis, Donald Trump, at a televised cabinet meeting, called Somali Americans garbage.
And let me tell you, having worked with Somali refugees for 2 years in East Africa, I was shocked. And let me tell you, the Somalis that I knew in Nairobi were among the hardest working people that you could imagine. So I think there's two things going on. It's interesting. I always love talking to you. It helps me clarify what I'm thinking. There are two things going on. One, you have a nation of immigrants and people who have, as you say, brought here against their will. Uh, who some of whom are saying that we don't want immigrants or that's not who we are. And then you also have a nation that includes many Christians who are going against the Gospels, where Jesus says
Yeah.
you should welcome the stranger. So
Yeah.
there is this kind of willful ignorance of what we are as Americans and what many of us are as Christians. And I really don't understand how people can really sort of square those things. I
Yeah.
mean, I know
Yeah.
there are lots of excuses. I know that Speaker Mike Johnson. Again, I don't like getting political, but Speaker Mike Johnson talked about Romans 13, right, about following civil authorities. And I don't have to tell you, you know more scripture than I do. But I thought there was a wonderful response from some of the bishops who pointed out not only Jesus is called to welcome the stranger, but that Romans 13 that is not an absolute. I mean, if it were an absolute, then you could say that, then all the Germans should have, obeyed Hitler. So it really is this kind of willful and willed ignorance, I
Yeah.
think, that we
No,
really have
no.
to confront as much as we can.
I think it's really important to name the way, frankly, that the Catholic Church has stood up in this moment, and I think it's something to really claim. I hope you feel gratified by it. I know those of us who are out there in the streets, it means something
Yeah.
when cardinals are saying no, when Pope Leo himself is saying no, and I think I know the Catholic Church tries to, it is both in the world and above the world, or how I'm framing it. Just this is a very lay, but I think it's really been important. And I'm with a lot of people who are trying to do good work in this moment. When someone like Cardinal Supage shows up to a big webinar and speaks, it actually means a lot. Because it just and I think right now, one of the things I like to talk about is Christians are showing up, and Americans in general are so hopeful and hungry for Christians to actually show up like Christians right now.
Yeah, and to speak about the Gospels. And one of the great things is for people who might be listening and say, "Oh, that's too political," and they're preaching the gospel, which is
That's it.
being with the stranger. And the Catholic Church in the United States, in particular, I have to say, it's not perfect. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is not perfect. Not every bishop is perfect, but they have been great on this in
Yeah.
standing with migrants and refugees. And we have to ask ourselves, and as Pope Leo and Pope Francis before him, and frankly, Benedict and John Paul, and all going all the way back. Pius XII, which I love, in the 1950s, wrote a letter called Exul Familia Nazarethana, where he says the Holy Family is the archetype of every migrant family. So like way back in the 50s and even before that. And what are they doing? Well, they're not only speaking up, but as you said, people like Cardinal Supich and Pope Leo and Archbishop Wester and Cardinal Tobin and on and on and on. But they're showing up
That's right.
at protests, at ICE detention centers. And what I think is so great is they're standing with these people. And I also want to say one more thing, Paul. one of the reasons that we are able to do this in the church is because we know this community so well.
Right.
Um, Not
Right.
only because they are, primarily, Spanish speaking along the border, but all over the world. As I said earlier, I worked for 2 years with the Jesuit Refugee Service. The church has been with refugees all over the world, and so we know this community, and therefore we're able to speak from a position of not only gospel authority but just experience, and I
Yeah.
think that makes our
That's right.
voice more
Well,
powerful.
I think that's the thing. This isn't rooted in ideology. This is rooted in pastoral care
Hmm.
in many ways. And I think that you're also seeing that in some of the more conservative evangelical Latino communities who are recognizing that their members are actually being restricted from going to worship because they're fearful of being picked up. And when we think about freedom of religion in this country
Hmm.
and anyway, I think that this is, I do want to say that it feels like a very important moment for American Christianity and including, the Protestant and Catholic writ large and the wider religious community because, you know, it's very hard, to square this when you look at there's no soaring rhetoric coming from the other side that inspires people. That's why we're targeting these communities. No one is no one is really. Anyway, I just think it's so important what's happening, and I appreciate it. I do want to let's turn back a little bit to your book, Work in Progress, and maybe you can, because there are a lot of you going from job to job to job, and you're kind of like, okay, but I'm just wondering, underneath it, was there a river? I mean, you were kind of a practicing Catholic all along. You even in college, you were the Catholic the kid that the other students knew. Like, look at that weirdo over there who's actually practicing Catholic. And there was a river, but what was the moment? What was the catalyst for saying, okay, I have this river, and now I'm feeling actually like I'm feeling called to the priesthood, which is a big shift.
I would say, as I say in the book, I was a kind of lukewarm Catholic. So my parents were good people, and we went through the motions. It doesn't mean they were insincere, but I didn't go to a Catholic elementary school or a Catholic high school, or certainly the University of Pennsylvania was not by any stretch of the imagination a Catholic school. Most of my friends were Protestant and Jewish. I didn't know really that many Catholics, and certainly not real devout Catholics. And so I sort of stumbled along. I was at Wharton, and to sort of telescope things a bit, I finished with a degree in finance, took a job at GE. And, this is the 1980s, very exciting. I was a yuppie, like, all of us were, even though that was an epithet back then. But I eventually started to realize, Paul, that this was just not for me. Business is a vocation for lots and lots of people who contribute to the common good. But I just started to feel miserable. And it started to get me stressed out. I was working with GE in Stamford, Connecticut, very stressed, 24/7 almost. That's how it felt. Stomach problems, migraines, first migraine ever. And one night I turned on the TV, and there was a documentary about Thomas Merton, who I know a lot of your listeners will know, the Trappist monk. And it just captivated me. And I just
Mm.
thought, maybe this is the way, right? This life seems so much more romantic. And I read his book, The Seven-Story Mountain, and on the basis of just that book, and really knowing nothing about, I mean, you come from a family of, distinguished religious leaders and pastors, but knowing nothing about that, I just went to my local parish priest and said, I think I want to be, I think I want to be a priest. And he said, well, you might as well talk to the Jesuits up the street.
Wow.
Yeah,
But
that was
why?
the, yeah, that
Why
was,
the Jesuits? I
uh,
mean, that is
be,
I think that's so interesting. And it makes total sense now. I can't imagine you anything but a Jesuit, but at the time, what did that mean to him, to you?
well, funny enough, I was in Stamford, Connecticut at St. Leo's Parish, and he had this particular guy happened to know Jesuits up the street in Fairfield, Connecticut, where we have Fairfield University. So it was just a kind of aside, like the Jesuits are up there. Why
Uh-huh.
not get in touch with them?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's funny talking to you. Let me just share something with you. The other thing I knew nothing about, I want to make it a little more personal in terms of your background. If you had said to me, talk to me about the social gospel, or
Mm.
talk to me about social justice, or talk to me about the Christian tradition of the social gospel,
Or Catholic social
or
teachings.
Catholic social, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm.
And so while I was kind to poor people, and I would give homeless people or unhoused people money. The idea that Catholicism or Christianity more broadly, could encompass, as you know, the social gospel and Catholic social teaching. That was all completely. I was ignorant of all of that.
Wow.
So I came to the Jesuits and I came to religious life and I came to the priesthood, really kind of a tabula rasa, and
Mm.
they were able to, fill me up.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's wonderful about your all of your writing, because you just are obviously I really hate to, as I say, I hate to compliment you because I'm worried it's going to be bad for your soul. But all of your books are so approachable, I think, and maybe in part because you're sympathetic with people. You're not like speaking into this high, either Catholic or Christian or anything, like, oh, you all know the language, so I'm going to really,
Yeah.
make it complicated and you're really speaking into people who maybe it's the first book on Jesus they've ever read.
Well, thanks for
And
noticing that.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I really think that's one of your big gifts is that you make it real, you make it deep, but you make it plain.
Well, thanks for noticing that. There's a couple reasons why I do that. Number one, I'm not an academic, right?
Right.
And so I
Right.
don't, I couldn't write in that way even if I wanted to. And I'm not an academic. I don't set out to write that way. Secondly, based, as listeners will know now, based on our conversation, I did not grow up in a really heavily Catholic world, and so most of my friends were not Catholic, and so I don't come from what I call Catholic land, right? Third, I learned a lot of this stuff, like the social gospel and Walter Rauschenbush and all that stuff, and Catholic social teaching relatively late. So I
Mm.
often say I'm writing for myself at age 25, who didn't know this stuff, and who needs to be. I always assume my reader can come up to speed quickly, but I'm not going to assume that they know who Walter Rauschenbush was or who Leo the 13th was.
Right. Right.
But I also find I like books like that.
I
One of
do
my
too.
heroes in writing, believe it or not, is Father Dan Harrington, who was my New Testament professor in graduate school at West End Jesuit School of Theology. Now
Uh-huh.
he edited the Sacropagina series. Now Dan Harrington, as we used to say, the old expression, has forgotten more about the New Testament than I will ever learn. Okay,
Uh-huh.
but when you open his books, they're very simple.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah, I
very
love that.
clear, and I
Yeah.
love the idea that you can say something clearly, and you don't need to go crazy with
Right.
all this verbiage and kind of terminology. I really like that style. I like that kind of clear, direct
Yeah.
style,
Yeah.
and
I
and
think
that appeals to me.
it's also it's a pastoral move because you're actually really trying to connect with the reader and
Well, and
not,
Jesus spoke pretty plainly,
yeah,
right?
yeah. You mentioned Pope Leo, who was really responsible for Catholic social teaching, and we have a new Pope Leo, and
Mm.
maybe that's not completely an accident, that someone rooted the way a pope takes a name, and you will correct me, but it seemed like with Pope Francis he was saying something, and
Oh.
Pope Leo is saying something, and um, you've met Pope Leo.
Mhm.
This is someone who was known to you because it was an
Mhm.
American Catholic,
Mhm.
and tell us a little bit about how you understand Pope Leo and who he is for this moment.
Yeah, I'd love to. The first thing I want to tell all the listeners, and I think I may have shared this with you privately, he is a great guy. He is
Mm.
a really great, kind, smart, discerning, prayerful, centered guy. And how do I know him? I'm not his best friend, obviously, but I got to know him a little bit before the synod started, the Synod of Bishops, which was this multi-year gathering. Um, just briefly, I met him, and he's an American, when I was in Rome for a visit. And then he was at the synod. We were at the synod together. And here's a funny story. For 2 weeks during October 2024, we were at the same table of 12 people. We were working together for, 8 hours a day, from 8:30 to 4:30 to 7:30. And it was discussing church topics and all this. And he was very quiet and very reserved, but you get to know somebody, right? And so I was helping out ABC on the conclave. And Now, it is not true, and I know you're not saying this. It is not true that he was totally unexpected. He would have been like the second tier of cardinal candidates. But when he came out on the balcony, it was like seeing you come into the balcony. It was just like, I can't believe he's dressed like this. He's the Pope now, and he chooses, and he came out on the balcony and he chose Leo the 14th, which was a masterstroke. It's a nod to Leo the 13th. But I was so excited. I cried at the end because I was so moved and I knew he was such a great guy. Anyway, I go back to the Jesuit headquarters where I was staying, the Curie, a few 100 feet away. And I said to a Jesuit, I love this line. I said to a Jesuit, I can't believe it. He was at my table at the synod. And this Jesuit said, no, you were at his table at the synod.
I love that.
But what is he? He is going to continue the legacy of Francis in so many ways, in terms of synodality, making the church more open. He's a much different kind of person than Francis. He's much more reserved. But, interestingly, Paul, one of the things that has surprised me about him so much, he is very reserved. He's a very still, quiet person. And he's been actually surprisingly, I won't say outspoken, but surprisingly open about sharing his opinions about certain things when he needs to. So if you had asked me 6 months ago, what would he be like about these kind of political things, I would have said, I'm sure he's going to say nothing. He'll sell nothing. He might put out a statement. He'll work through No, he's been pretty blunt in a good way. I don't think political, but sort of gospel oriented. And one more thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up. I think one of the most common sort of critiques of Pope Francis when it comes to the United States was he doesn't understand the U.S. Well, guess what? You can't say that about Pope Leo. So
Yeah,
that excuse
right.
kind of goes out the window. And I think
Well,
that's frustrating to a lot of people who want to ignore what he's saying.
yeah, he's speaking into the reality on the ground here. He knows it. And he also knows the reality on the ground in Latin America. I've found his biography fascinating.
Absolutely.
One of the amazing things that you have used your position, which is, someone who really understands how to speak into the public and speak into the moment, you have really helped create bridges between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church. And I think it's been life-giving. Literally, I think you've saved lives by articulating things, creating space for conversation. You've really tried to be a bridge when some people would just rather it just be ruptured. You had a chance to talk to Pope Francis, and we have talked about that. I am curious how you imagine Pope Leo in this regard. He has a lot on his plate. I'm just wondering if you have any insight into the way he understands the kind of work you're doing in the church.
Sure.
In
Well,
that regards.
I met with him one-on-one in September for about 30 minutes. And the message I got from him very clearly is that he wants to continue the mission of welcome and inclusion that Francis started, but he also has a lot of stuff on his plate. This is one of the things that, the message I heard, he has, Ukraine and Gaza and
Right.
Sudan and Myanmar and peace and unity. So I see him as very open and very welcoming. And the other thing I just want to say to people is this is a very smart guy. I mean, this is a youngish, young to me, American who's been all over the world. He was the head of the Augustinian order. He knows human nature. He's very wise. And so I got welcome and inclusion. And look, just the fact that he would meet with me, right, publicly. The other thing I want to say is this, which I think it didn't get as much press as I thought it was going to get. In September, when I was over there was an immense pilgrimage of LGBTQ people to Rome for the Jubilee. We had, in the Church of the Jesu, which is the mother church of the Jesuits, the order that I belong to, a liturgy, a prayer service Friday night with 1,300 people. Okay, now you might say, well, big deal. Okay, no, okay, fine. So the Jesuits allowed LGBT people to have prayer service. Okay, what was a big deal that was kind of unavoidable was the next day there was a mass celebrated by the vice president of the Italian Bishops' Conference, the number 2 bishop in Italy, Bishop Francesco Savino, with the approval of the Pope. So that's a big step forward. This is a
Wow.
public mass. Now people were, and it was beautiful.
Wow.
And so I think he might be a little more reserved about these things than Pope Francis was. Pope Francis would always just open up his mouth and who knows what was
Yeah.
going to come out.
Yeah.
He's going to be much more reserved, but he also has a longer time in office.
Right.
My sense was Francis seemed to be always kind of a man in a hurry, because he was older.
That's
So
interesting.
I really trust Leo, and I really think we're very lucky to have him as Pope.
I think we're lucky as Americans to have him as Pope
Absolutely.
as well. We're talking a lot about courage, and everything we've really been talking about is rooted in courage. How do you understand courage? What does courage look like to you right now?
Boy, I think now I'm going to make your head big. I think a lot of the stuff that you're doing, and one of the things I like about what you're doing online and in person is that you're bringing the gospel into these situations as a pastor, right? And as a theologian and as a public figure. I think I'll share a story with you. One of my heroes, and I've been coming back to this a lot lately. One of my heroes is a guy named Greg Boyle.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I
and-
love Greg Boyle.
Yeah,
Oh, my
Greg
God.
Boyle is a really saintly person. I think I've met a few living saints, and he's one of them. He's a Jesuit priest who works with former gang members and gang members in L.A. primarily. He's very well known.
Right.
So here's a great story, Paul. So I was at a gathering of students called the long name, the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. It's a big social justice, as you probably know, gathering of Jesuit students. In any event, they had an event where I was interviewing Greg Boyle. You've seen those things where you're in front of an
Yeah,
audience and there's someone who's the kind of interlocutor. In any event, he gave this great talk about all the homies, as he calls them. And he always brings one of the homies with him. And there was a Q&A, and this guy gets up and says, I work in Camden, New Jersey, which for people who don't know is fairly poor. And I work with a lot of people who are despairing. What advice would you give me, Greg, to help me with these people? Now, Paul, you know me pretty well. I was on the stage thinking, oh gosh, like what would I say? Like what are the 5 things I would say? You need to be authentic. You know what Greg said? Greg said, are you standing with them?
Mm.
And the guy said, yeah. And he says, then that's all you need to do. And I just think that's what courage is today. It's standing with people who are being marginalized and persecuted. I just love that. And what God does in Jesus is God comes to stand with us. Literally, I'm just thinking this, physically standing with us as a human being, as Jesus. And then who does Jesus stand with? Jesus stands with those on the margins. And so we're called to stand with these people. And I just think that's such a great image for me.
Wow, that's a good sermon right there. So thank you very much. Work in progress, confessions of a busboy, dishwasher, caddy, usher, factory worker, bank teller, corporate tool, and priest. A funny, wise, and inspiring spiritual memoir. Brother Jim Martin, this has been such a nice conversation. Thank you, as always, for joining and also for all you're doing and for this great book. This is a memoir of an amazing priest, but it's also a person who's recollecting their life and inviting us to look at our own lives. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your great new book.
Thank you, Paul. Truly my pleasure, and God bless you and all your wonderful work.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion with Father Jim Martin? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep growing The State of Belief. Please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I'll be in conversation with attorney, author, and activist J. Michelson. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.